She slammed the gate in my face so hard the metal latch rattled against the post, and her smile, God, that smile, was the kind you only see on someone who's been waiting years to do exactly this. "Danny asked me to tell you," Linda said, pressing her palm flat against the wooden slats like she was afraid I'd push through, "that he's fallen in love with someone else, and thanks for the house you built on my land." Then she turned and walked back up the porch steps without a single glance over her shoulder. My duffel bag was already by the fence. So was a cardboard box with my work boots sitting on top of it, and the small framed photo from our bedroom nightstand, the one from our trip to the Outer Banks 2 summers ago, Danny's arm around me, both of us sunburned and laughing. Someone had tossed it in there face down. I stood on that sidewalk in 94-degree July heat in a suburb 20 minutes outside of D.C., staring at the house I had spent the last 2.5 years helping to build, and I couldn't feel a single thing. Not yet. Let me back up. My name is Celeste. I'm 24 years old, and I operate a tower crane for a commercial construction company out of Arlington. I know. People get this look when I tell them, this little flicker of surprise they try to hide. A woman, barely old enough to rent a car in some states, climbing 160 feet of steel ladder before sunrise and moving steel beams around like they weigh nothing. But that job is the one thing in my life I have never once doubted. Up in that cab, with the whole city spread out below me and the radio crackling and the hand signals coming up from the riggers, I am completely certain of exactly what I'm doing. Every load has a weight, every swing has a radius, every decision has a consequence you can calculate. I wish the rest of my life had worked like that. I met Danny Hargrove in July 5 years ago, a different July, one that smelled like cut grass and chlorine from his mom's backyard pool. I was 19, just 2 months into my apprenticeship, still getting used to the calluses on my palms. He was 22, easy grinning, the kind of guy who remembered your coffee order after one conversation. We were at a 4th of July cookout, hosted by a coworker of his, and he spent 40 minutes asking me genuine questions about tower cranes. Not the fake interested kind, the actually curious kind. He wanted to know how the counterweights worked. He wanted to know if I got scared. I told him the only time I ever got scared was on the ground, and he laughed like that was the best answer he'd ever heard. We were together for 2 years before he proposed, engaged for another year, married the following April, a small ceremony at a botanical garden in Maryland, 30 people, my mom crying through the whole thing. I was 22, Danny was 25. It felt, genuinely, like the beginning of something solid. His mother, Linda Hargrove, lived about 8 miles from us in a house on a double lot out in Fairfax County. The property had been in the family since Danny's grandfather bought it in the late 70s, nearly 3/4 of an acre, which out here in the D.C. suburbs is basically a minor miracle. The back half of the lot was undeveloped, just grass, 2 old oak trees, and a rusted swing set that nobody had touched in 15 years. The conversation about building on that land started maybe 6 months into our marriage. Danny brought it up first. His mom had offered, or so he said, to let us build a house on the back portion of the lot. We could subdivide the parcel, get our own address, have a real yard. It would save us from the insane D.C. area housing market, where a 2-bedroom starter home in a decent school district was going for $450,000 minimum. Danny made decent money in IT project management, and I was pulling in solid overtime at the crane company, but we were still staring at a 15-year mortgage on a house that would need a new roof in 5 years. "Mom wants to do this for us," Danny said one evening in October of our first year of marriage. We were sitting on the balcony of our apartment in Roslyn, watching the planes stack up on approach to Reagan National. "She says it's just sitting there. She wants to see us settled." I had questions. I had a lot of questions. I asked about the deed. I asked about a proper land use agreement. I asked about what happened if Linda ever wanted to sell. Danny waved all of it off, not dismissively, just confidently, the way he always did when he thought I was overcomplicating something. Celeste, she's my mother. We're family. We're not drawing up contracts with family. I let it go. That was the first mistake. We broke ground the following spring. I threw myself into that project the way I throw myself into everything, completely. I researched contractors, got 3 competitive bids, negotiated the lumber costs myself because I knew the wholesale rates from my construction contacts. Danny handled the permits and the bank. We took out a construction loan in both our names, $214,000. Linda signed a notarized letter, not a deed, not a recorded easement, just a letter, stating that she granted us permission to build a single-family residence on the rear portion of her property for our personal use. I remember reading that letter and feeling a small, cold prickle at the back of my neck. I remember thinking, this isn't enough. But Danny was sitting right there, and he looked so happy, and his mother had made us dinner that night, pot roast, his favorite, and smiled at me across the table and called me sweetheart for maybe the 4th time in our entire marriage. I didn't push. Second mistake. The house took 14 months to finish. I was on site almost every weekend. I know how to read blueprints, and I know what a plumb wall looks like, and I know when a subcontractor is cutting corners, so I kept a close eye on everything. Danny helped when he could, but he traveled a lot for work, client sites in Atlanta, Chicago, once a 2-week stretch in Seattle. His younger brother Marcus would sometimes show up on Saturdays, ostensibly to help, but mostly he'd stand around drinking the contractor's coffee and making jokes. Marcus was 21 when we got married, and I'd never quite figured out how to feel about him. He was funny in a way that sometimes felt like it had an edge to it. He'd say something that sounded like a compliment, but left you vaguely uncomfortable, and then he'd grin like he knew exactly what he'd done. Danny thought he was hilarious. Linda adored him with the specific, unguarded warmth she never quite extended to me. He was the baby of the family, the one who could do no wrong. I noticed over those 14 months of construction that Marcus was around a lot, more than seemed necessary. He'd show up at the work site on days I hadn't mentioned to anyone. Once I came back from a supply run to find him in the unfinished kitchen, talking on his phone, pacing, and he clicked off the call the second he saw me. When I asked who he was talking to, he said, "Just a buddy," and changed the subject. I filed that away and didn't think about it too hard. We moved into the house in June, 11 months ago. 2 bedrooms, an open kitchen, a back porch overlooking the oak trees, hardwood floors I had helped sand and stain myself, a garden bed along the south wall that I'd already started planting with tomatoes and basil. It was ours. We'd built it. I'd watched every beam go up and every wall get framed and every fixture get hung, and standing in that kitchen the first morning, drinking coffee in the quiet, I felt something I hadn't felt since before all the stress and the loan paperwork and the contractor arguments. I felt like everything was going to be okay. The first thing I noticed was small. Danny started coming home later. Not dramatically later, 20 minutes, sometimes 40. He'd always had flexible hours, so I didn't make anything of it at first. He said a new project was ramping up, a federal contract, lots of evening calls with stakeholders in the Pacific time zone. It was plausible. It was completely plausible. But then there was a night in late May, about 6 weeks before Linda slammed that gate in my face, when I came home from a double shift, bone-tired, and Danny wasn't there. He wasn't answering his phone. I texted him twice and got nothing back for almost 2 hours. When he finally walked in at 11:15, he smelled like someone else's fabric softener, and he had this look on his face, just for a second before he smoothed it out, that I'd never seen before. "Where were you?" I asked. "Marcus's," he said. "We grabbed dinner. I told you." He hadn't told me. I was almost certain he hadn't told me. But when I said that, he looked at me with this patient, slightly tired expression and said, "Celeste, I texted you at 6. Check your phone." I checked. There was no text. "It probably didn't go through," he said. "The service is spotty near Marcus's place." And here's the thing about gaslighting. It doesn't work because you're stupid. It works because the person doing it is someone you trust, and your brain will do genuinely extraordinary gymnastics to protect that trust. I stood there in our kitchen, in the house I had built with my own hands, and I thought, maybe I missed it. Maybe the notification didn't pop. Maybe I've been so exhausted from these double shifts that I'm losing track of things. I set my phone down on the counter and said, "Okay, I'm going to bed." Danny kissed me on the forehead and said, "You work too hard, babe." I lay in the dark for a long time after he fell asleep, staring at the ceiling I had helped frame, listening to the oak trees move outside the window. Something was wrong. I didn't know what it was yet, but I knew, the way you know when a load is off balance before the numbers confirm it, that something was wrong. 3 weeks later, I came home from an early shift on a Tuesday to find the house completely empty of Danny's things, and Linda standing on her porch, watching me with her arms crossed. She waited until I was at the gate before she walked down to meet me, and then she told me. I stood there holding my work gloves, covered in grease and July sweat, looking at the box with my Outer Banks photo in it, and I tried to understand what was happening. Danny had fallen in love with someone else. Danny had asked his mother to handle this. Danny had not called me, had not texted me, had not left a note on the kitchen counter of the house I had spent 14 months building with my bare hands. Linda reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone, and for just a moment I actually thought, she was going to show me something that would make this make sense, some explanation, some piece of context I was missing. Instead, she opened her texts and started typing something. She was smiling while she typed, the same smile from the gate. And then her phone buzzed with a reply. I watched her read it. I watched the smile stay on her face for exactly 3 more seconds, and then I watched it disappear. Her face went the color of old concrete. Her hand tightened around the phone until her knuckles went white. She read the message again, slower this time, and when she looked up at me, something in her expression had cracked completely open. "What does it say?" I asked. She didn't answer me. She just stared at the screen. I took a step closer to the fence. "Linda, what does it say?" She finally looked up at me, and I don't have a word for the expression on her face. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't quite fear. It was something rawer than both, the look of someone who has just realized the ground under their feet isn't solid. "It's from Marcus," she said. Her voice had gone flat, like something had been switched off inside it. I waited. She turned the phone around and held it out to me with a hand that wasn't entirely steady. The screen was bright in the July glare, and I had to angle it to read it, but I read every word. "Mom, there's something you need to know before this goes any further. Danny didn't just fall in love. He's been seeing Priya since February. Priya works in his office. She's also the one he's been telling everything to, including about the house. Including the fact that the construction loan is in both his name and Celeste's, which means Celeste is on the hook for $214,000 on a house she no longer lives in, on land she doesn't own. And Danny thinks that's just going to sort itself out. It won't. I've been trying to tell him that for 2 months. He won't listen. So I'm telling you, if you don't make this right, Celeste is going to sue, and she's going to win, and the whole property goes into litigation. The lawyers will eat all of it. Think about what you're actually doing here." I read it twice. I handed the phone back. Neither of us said anything for a long moment. A car rolled slowly past on the street behind me. Somewhere in the backyard, one of the oak trees creaked in the heat. "He told you I'd just leave," I said. It wasn't a question. "He told you I'd grab my box and my bag and disappear, and that would be that." Linda didn't answer, which was its own kind of answer. "He doesn't know me very well," I said, "but then I guess I didn't know him very well either." I picked up my duffel bag. I picked up my cardboard box with the work boots and the photo, and I walked to my truck, put everything in the back seat, and sat behind the wheel for a minute in the full sun with the windows down. Then I called my attorney. Her name was Diane Castellano, and I'd hired her 4 days earlier because I am not actually the kind of person who stands around waiting to be blindsided twice. The late nights, the missing texts, the fabric softener smell, the way Marcus had gone quiet and careful around me in those last few weeks before everything fell apart. I had felt the load shifting long before it dropped. I hadn't been certain, but I'd been certain enough to spend $300 on an hour of Diane's time and walk out of her office with a list of things to do before anything happened officially. I had already pulled copies of the construction loan documents. I had already requested a title search on the Fairfax County parcel. I had already taken photos of every room in the house, every appliance, every fixture I had sourced and paid for personally. I had receipts going back 14 months, organized by date, scanned into a folder on my phone. What I hadn't had yet was leverage. Marcus's text had just handed it to me. "Diane," I said when she picked up. She showed me a text from Marcus. He laid out the whole thing, the loan, the land, Danny's girlfriend. He basically told Linda she was about to lose the property to litigation. "Can we use that?" "Is it in writing?" Diane asked. "It's a text on her phone." "Screenshot it if you can. Did she show it to you voluntarily?" She held the phone out and let me read it. There was a brief pause. "Okay, here's where we are. The construction loan is the cleanest angle. Both names, $214,000, secured against an asset that sits on land you have no recorded interest in. That's a mess for everyone, including Linda. The notarized letter she signed gives us something to argue. It establishes intent to grant use, maybe equitable interest, but it's going to depend on the judge. What I want to do right now is file for an injunction to prevent the property from being sold or transferred while we sort this out." "How fast can you do that?" "I can have the paperwork drafted by Thursday, but Celeste, I need you to do something tonight." "What?" "Go back to that house and take everything that's yours, every tool, every piece of furniture you paid for, every plant in that garden bed. Document it on video as you remove it. Don't give them a chance to change the locks." I looked at the clock on my truck's dashboard. It was just past 3 in the afternoon. "I'll call you when I'm done," I said. I drove back around to the rear of the property. There was a side gate that accessed the back lot directly from the street, and the padlock on it was one I had bought and installed myself. My key still worked. I recorded everything on my phone as I walked through. The hardwood floors, the kitchen cabinets I'd watched go up one by one, the back porch with the 2 chairs Danny and I had bought at an estate sale in Annandale. I narrated the whole thing, date-stamped, walking slowly. Then I started loading my truck, the furniture that I had receipts for, the washer and dryer I had purchased outright before we got the loan, the garden tools, every tomato plant from that south-facing bed, root ball and all, wrapped in old newspaper. I worked steadily for 2.5 hours in the July heat, and when Linda appeared at the back fence to watch me, I didn't stop. I didn't look at her. I just kept working. At one point she said, "You can't take those appliances. They're part of the house." "I have the purchase receipt on my phone," I said without breaking stride. "Bought and paid for before the construction loan was drawn. You're welcome to dispute it in court." She didn't say anything else after that. I drove away at 6:15 with a full truck bed and a video record of every item I'd removed. My phone had 47% battery left, and I was so dehydrated I could feel it in the back of my skull. I stopped at a gas station 2 miles away, bought a Gatorade and a bottle of water, sat in the parking lot and drank both of them, and then I called my mom. She didn't ask a lot of questions. She just said, "Come home," and that was enough. The legal process took 7 months. I know people imagine it faster, the righteous satisfaction of a single courtroom moment, a gavel coming down, a villain getting their face shown to them. It's not like that. It's emails and document requests and deposition prep and weeks where nothing seems to be moving at all. Diane filed the injunction. It was granted within 10 days. The property couldn't be sold, transferred, or refinanced while the case was pending. That froze Linda in place in a way I don't think she'd anticipated. Danny hired his own attorney, a guy named Fielding, who, Diane told me, specialized in family law and seemed surprised to be dealing with a construction lien dispute. What Danny had apparently not told Fielding, or maybe had told him and hoped would go away, was the paper trail. The loan was in both our names, which made me a creditor with an interest in the asset the loan had created. The asset sat on Linda's land, but the improvement had been made in good faith based on a written permission document she had signed and had notarized. Virginia has equitable principles around this kind of situation. It's not bulletproof, but it's not nothing either. Fielding pushed for a settlement in month 4. So did Linda's personal attorney, a woman named Barbara, who called Diane and spent 20 minutes explaining that her client was a 71-year-old woman on a fixed income who hadn't understood the full implications of what she'd signed. Diane relayed this to me over the phone, with the precise, neutral tone of someone who has heard this particular speech many times before. "What do you want?" Diane asked me. I thought about it. I thought about the 14 months of weekends. I thought about the lumber costs I'd negotiated and the subcontractors I'd kept honest and the floors I'd sanded on my knees in November. I thought about Danny texting me a fake alibi and then telling me I'd missed a notification. I thought about the gate slamming in my face. "I want the loan paid off," I said, "full $214,000, and I want my documented out-of-pocket expenses reimbursed. I've got receipts for $31,400 in materials and labor I paid personally, and I want it in writing that I have no further liability connected to that property, ever." "That's $245,400, Diane said. "I know. They'll push back." "They can push back all they want. That injunction is costing Linda more every month it sits there. She can't rent the house, she can't sell the back lot, she can't do anything with that property while we're in litigation. Barbara knows that." Diane was quiet for a moment. "Give me until Friday." They settled for $238,000. Not everything I'd asked for, but close enough. The construction loan, paid in full, both names cleared. A separate check for $24,000 to cover the materials and the personal labor costs, slightly less than the full $31,400, but Diane had advised me to take it rather than drag the receipts dispute into a second round of negotiation. All liability released, signed, notarized, filed with the county. Danny's share of the settlement came partly from a refinancing Linda did on the front house, the original property, and partly, as I learned much later from Marcus, from Danny's 401k. He took an early withdrawal penalty on top of it. Priya, as it turned out, had not known about the house, the loan, or any of the legal situation when she started seeing him. When she found out, she ended things. I didn't feel triumphant about that part. I just felt tired. Marcus called me once, about 2 weeks after the settlement closed. I almost didn't pick up. "I'm sorry," he said. He sounded like he meant it. "I should have said something sooner. I knew something was going on with Danny for months, and I kept thinking he'd handle it himself." "Why did you send that text to your mom?" I asked. "Because I was watching her stand there and smile while she did something genuinely wrong," he said. "And I couldn't watch that. I didn't tell him he'd done the right thing. I didn't tell him anything, really. I just said, 'Okay, Marcus,' and let the conversation end." I moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in Arlington in September, 10 minutes from the crane yard. It's small, and the upstairs neighbor drops things at 7 in the morning, and the parking situation is genuinely ridiculous. I have a pot of basil on the kitchen windowsill, rescued from the garden bed, that is somehow thriving despite the fact that I forget to water it about half the time. The framed Outer Banks photo is in a box in the closet. I haven't thrown it away, but I haven't looked at it either. Someday I'll figure out what to do with it. I'm 24 years old. I have a cleared credit record, a funded savings account, and a settlement check that I split between an emergency fund and a down payment account. I have a job where I climb 160 feet of steel before the sun comes up, and I move things that most people can't lift, and I know, to the pound, exactly what I'm carrying. The one thing I have learned, the thing I keep coming back to up in that cab, when it's quiet and the city is still half dark below me, is that there is no such thing as, we're family, we don't need contracts. Family is not a substitute for documentation. Love is not a substitute for a recorded easement. Trust is not a substitute for a deed. The people who tell you that you're overcomplicating things by asking for things in writing are almost always the people who benefit from your not having them. I know that now. I knew it then, actually, that small, cold prickle at the back of my neck when I read Linda's notarized letter. I knew it, and I let it go anyway, because I wanted the piece of the dinner table and the pot roast and someone calling me sweetheart, even when they didn't quite mean it. That's the part I'm still working on. Not the money, not the house, not Danny. The part where I talked myself out of trusting my own read of the load. Up in the crane cab, I never do that. I never second-guess the weight. I'm learning to be the same way on the ground.